Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Thank you. We'll start today's class by reading from the book entitled Prabhupada, He Built a House in Which the Whole World Can Live. It's the abridged version of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. We left off last time. Srila Prabhupada is in London, and they have just basically kidnapped the Radha Krishna deities and have brought them back to the temple and preparing to install. Shyamasundar had completed most of the altar except for Lord Jagannath's altar and the canopy over the Radha Krishna throne. Both the canopy and Lord Jagannath's altar would be supported by 4 heavy wooden columns, more than 6 feet high. 2 rear columns would hold a marble slab for the Jagannath deities to stand on, and 2 front columns were now supporting Radha and Krishna's large velvet canopy. The columns were big and heavy. Shyamasundar called them elephant leg columns. The columns now stood in place on the altar, although Shyamasundar hadn't had a chance to secure them. The day before the installation, Shyamasundar collapsed upstairs in exhaustion. On opening day, many guests, Indians especially, crowded the temple, responding to flyers and advertisements. Apple Records had supplied a professional florist who had decorated the room with floral arrangements. The BBC television crew was on hand to videotape the ceremony. While most of the devotees held kirtan, Prabhupada, behind a curtain at the other end of the temple, bathed Radha and Krishna. It would be interesting to see if the BBC still had that on in their archives. It would be nice to watch. The plan was that after the bathing ceremony, the deities would be placed on the altar and Yamuna would dress them. Once they were dressed and enthroned, the curtain would open for all the guests to behold Sri Sri Radha and Krishna. Prabhupada would lecture, and then everyone would feast. But because of Shyamasundar's oversight, the installation was almost became a disaster. Prabhupada had finished bathing the deities, and they had been placed on the marble altar when suddenly the elephant leg columns tottered. The canopy above the deities began to collapse. Prabhupada, seeing the danger, jumped onto the altar and seized the heavy columns in a split second. With great strength, he held the 2 front pillars in place. "Get this out of here," he shouted. While Prabhupada's arms protected the deities, the men removed the canopy, and then 2 men at a time carried each of the pillars away. The deities remained unharmed. While Srila Prabhupada was behind the curtain rescuing Radha and Krishna, on the other side of the curtain, guests and reporters awaited the unveiling of the deities. Unaware of the mishaps, the guests saw only men emerging from behind the curtain carrying large pillars and a canopy. The BBC camera crew began filming the canopy and pillars as they appeared from behind the curtain, taking them to be part of the ceremonial process. So that's kind of interesting because sometimes devotees will do the most insignificant things, and people who don't understand devotional service will see great significance or ask you, why do you do such? Why do you scratch your eyebrow with your left, with your right hand or something like that, looking for great significance in everything we do. So that's kind of interesting. So we'll read from Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Jaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayo Dirayat Before reciting Srimad Bhagavatam, we must first offer our respectful obeisances unto Lord Narayan, the personality of Godhead, unto Narayan Rishi, the supremmost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and Srila Vyasadeva, its author. Srimvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shavana Kirtana Nayantastabhadarani Vadunoti Saritsatam. Lord Sri Krishna, who is Paramatma in everyone's heart and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses the desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed an urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves glorious when properly heard and chanted. Nastapreshu vabhareshu nitya bhagavata sevaya bhagavatuttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naistaki. By regularly hearing Srimad Bhagavatam and by the rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome in the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving devotional service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised by transcendental songs, becomes established as an irrevocable fact. So we'll be reading today from Canto 6, Chapter 9, which is entitled The Appearance of the Demon Vritasura. Text 43, which is in prose, so I'll read the text myself. We'll go through the word for word, and then we'll do the translation, and I'll read the purport. Ata eva swayam tad upakalpalas yas makam bhagavata parama gurostava charana satta palasak chayam vivida vrijina samsara parish ramopashamanim upasritanam vayam yat kameno pasaditaha. So word for word. Ata eva, therefore. Swayam, yourself. Tat, that. Upakalpaya, please arrange. Asmakam, of us. Bhagavata, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Paramaguru, the Supreme Spiritual Master. Tava, of you. Charana, of the feet. Shatapalashat, like the lotus flowers with hundreds of petals. Chayam, the shade. Vividha, various. Vrijana, with dangerous positions. Samsara, of this conditioned life. Parishrama, the pain. Upashamanim, relieving. Upasritanam, the devotees who have taken shelter at your lotus feet. Vayam, we. Yat, for which. Kamena, by the desires. Upasaditaha, caused to come near the shelter of your lotus feet. Translation by Srila Prabhupada and purport. Dear Lord, you are omniscient, and therefore you know very well why we have taken shelter at your lotus feet, which provide shade that give relief from all material disturbances. Since you are the Supreme Spiritual Master, and you know everything, we have sought shelter at your lotus feet for instruction. Please give us relief by counteracting our present distress. Your lotus feet are the only shelter for a fully surrendered devotee, and are the only means for subduing all the tribulations of this material world. So I'll say, and you can repeat. Dear Lord, you are omniscient, and therefore you know well why we have taken shelter at your lotus feet, which provides shade that gives relief from all material disturbances. Since you are the Supreme Spiritual Master, and you know everything. We have sought shelter at your lotus feet for instruction. Please give us relief by counteracting our present distress. Your lotus feet are the only shelter for a fully surrendered devotee and are the only means for subduing all the tribulations of this material world. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. One need only seek shelter of the shade of the Lord's lotus feet. Then all the material tribulations that disturb him will be subdued, just as when one comes under the shadow of a big tree, the disturbances caused by the heat of the scorching sun are immediately mitigated without one's asking for relief. Therefore, the whole concern of the conditioned soul should be the lotus feet of the Lord. The conditioned soul suffering from various tribulations because of existing in this material world can be relieved only when he seeks shelter at the Lord's lotus feet. I'll read the translation again. Dear Lord, you are omniscient, and therefore you know very well why we have taken shelter at your lotus feet, which provides shade that gives relief from all material disturbances. Since you are the supreme spiritual master and you know everything, we have sought shelter of your lotus feet for instruction. Please give us relief by counteracting our present distress. Your lotus feet are the only shelter for a fully surrendered devotee and are the only means for subduing all the tribulations of this material world. So I've been asked to speak on Srimad Bhagavtam this morning, second time in a week, which is a record for me. And I'm not really qualified to speak on Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the work of Srila Vyasadeva, and very enlightened being. And the tradition is that the most advanced person present would speak, not the most senior person. Seniority doesn't necessarily indicate advancement. But it's a great honor to sit on the Vyasasana. We don't just invite anybody who comes along to sit up here and speak. So we should always feel ourselves unqualified, actually, to sit on the Vyasasana, because although we are repeating what we're hearing from Srimad Bhagavatam, which are the words of Srila Vyasadeva, our realizations may not be that great, and Srila Prabhupada said that we can only speak on Bhagavatam as far as our realizations allow. I did want to say something about sitting on the Vyasasana. When I was a younger devotee, there was a tradition that we always offered great respect to the Vyasasana. Before sitting on the Vyasasana, we would offer obeisances to the seat. And when getting on the Vyasasana, we were always very careful not to step on the Vyasasana, that we would sit and then put our feet on the Vyasasana rather than step on the Vyasasana and sit down. And then at the end of class, we would not just lounge around on the Vyasasana and discuss the daily activities or what's going on in the temple. As soon as we were done speaking, we would get off the Vyasasana and then continue with business. So that's some of the etiquette when sitting on the Vyasasana, just for those of you who will be sitting on the Vyasasana in future days. So we see here that, I'll give you a little bit of what's happening for those of you who have not been following this pastime. The demigods were head of spiritual master Vishvarupa, who was performing sacrifices so that they could overcome disturbances that were being caused by the demons. And the reason that the demons were causing them disturbances was because Lord Indra had failed to recognize his spiritual master when his spiritual master came to the assembly. And so the spiritual master did not give any offense, take any offense, or give any instruction, but just left. And because of the absence of the spiritual master, then the demigods had lost their potency. And the demons were able to take over and start giving them trouble. So they had Vishvarup come to try to mitigate that. But because Vishvarup was partially a demon, he was offering oblations not only to the demigods, but also to the demons. And so Vishwarup was dispatched, I guess. And then Vishwarup's father became upset. And so he prayed that, or made some sacrifice that he would have a son that would be able to vanquish Indra. But he said the mantra is wrong. And so this demon came out of the fire. And now the demigods are praying for relief from the demon. And of course, they know where to go because they are enlightened beings. Maybe not fully surrendered devotees, because they're coming to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And, you know, what they're saying here in this verse is actually true. They're praying to the Lord for relief, and they say that you are omniscient, and therefore you know very well why we have taken shelter at your lotus feet. And, of course, Lord Vishnu knows why they've taken shelter at his lotus feet. Because they're in distress and they're looking for some relief. But they're not shamed or put off by that. They do then start glorifying the Lord's lotus feet, saying that his feet give shade from relief, give relief from all material disturbances. So because the demigods are materially disturbed, they're praying to the Lord for relief. Shishi Korinatai Maya Poshashi Ki Jai. So they've sought shelter at the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead for instruction. But they're not looking for instruction on how to become a pure devotee or how to start rendering unalloyed devotional service. They're looking for instruction on how they can mitigate their distress, more or less. And then they say right out, we're asking for relief by please give us relief by counteracting our present distress. They're not praying for pure devotional service. Your lotus feet are the only shelter for the fully surrendered devotee and are the only means for subduing the tribulations of this material world. So they recognize that fact, that the shade of the Lord's lotus feet are the only shelter for this fully surrendered devotee. Although they are not fully surrendering, they're asking for some material benefit. But they're recognizing the fact that that's there. And Srila Prabhupada says in the purport that that's the only thing that one needs to seek is the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. And as we know from Bhagavad Gita, and as we spoke yesterday, there are 4 types of people who come to the Lord, devotees, those who are in need of money, those who are in distress, those who are inquisitive, and those who are looking for knowledge of the Absolute. And Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, those that are looking for the knowledge of the Absolute are considered best by him. But here we see that the demigods are not asking for knowledge of the Absolute. They're looking for relief from their distress. And what happens when someone is distressed and they come to the Lord for some relief or some benediction, that as soon as the distress is gone, then they lose interest. They go back to whatever they're doing. So this is the position of the demigods at this point in time. Srila Prabhupada he says that, you know, we don't need to ask the Lord for shelter or for relief, because the Lord knows what we need and he will give it to us. We don't have to ask. What the devotee should be asking for is that they be engaged in the privilege of rendering devotional service to the Lord. That does not come very easily. Srila Prabhupada says the whole concern of the conditioned soul should be the lotus feet of the Lord. The conditioned soul suffering from various tribulations because of existing in this material world, and it can only be relieved when he asks shelter for the Lord's lotus feet. So he gives the example in the purport that one can take shelter or shade of a tree without even asking. You get shelter from the scorching sun just by going into the shade of the tree, which is there available for everyone. And so likewise with the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, it's there for everyone, and we don't need to ask. The Lord will give us shelter because he knows what we need. And even if we have material desires, he knows what our desires are. And he'll give us what we need. We've been celebrating Govardhan Puja this week, day before yesterday or whenever it was, and again tomorrow. And we see that when the devastating rainfall came on Vrindavan and the people were in distress, the Brijvasis, the cowherd men and women, they didn't pray to Krishna, please help us, give us relief from this devastating rainfall, because they were just seeing Krishna as a young boy. But Krishna, because he's the protector of his devotees, didn't have to be asked. He just automatically said, let me provide shelter. And he lifted the Govardhan hill. Everyone was able to come underneath the shelter of Govardhan hill and reside there happily for 7 days. No one felt hunger or thirst. No one felt any distress. No one felt cold, because the Lord was providing everything that the devotees needed. And he was doing it very easily, lifting a huge mountain just with the little finger of his left hand. No one had to ask him for that shelter. He just provided it. So that should be our position, that we're seeking the shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord, not because we're in distress or not because we want some money or not because we just have some questions. We should seek shelter because we actually want to engage in devotional service, because that is the only means for us to not only mitigate our material suffering, but to allow Krishna to endow us with love of Godhead. We can't acquire love of Godhead by our own endeavor, whether it be materialistic or even in the chanting of the Maha Mantra. We understand that it's very purifying. It's the only means in this age of Kali. And when our hearts are purified through the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, then the Lord comes and endows us with love of Godhead, which is what we should be seeking as devotees of the Lord. So I have nothing else to say. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, please.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu. I just have kind of a practical question, I suppose, on the pastime. Something I'm not quite understanding is the part when the demon is called. You could just go over this part. It's confusing me.
So Twasta, who was the father of Vishvarup, who was killed by the demigods, prayed that, or chanted mantras, so that he would have a son who is the enemy of Indra. But he chanted the mantras wrong, and instead of his son being the enemy of Indra, he got a son of whom Indra is the enemy. So the key to that, it's kind of confusing, but the key to that is the meaning of the word enemy. And I believe that Srila Prabhupada is using the word enemy as equivalent with aggressor, or someone who is more dominant than the weaker party. So he was praying for a son that would be an aggressor and stronger and more dominant than Indra or the demigods. And because he recited the mantra wrong, now it turns out that Indra is the aggressor or the enemy of his son, Vritrasura. So Vritrasura, or his son, yeah. So then Vritrasura comes out of the sacrificial fire. And as we'll see in future chapters, Vritrasura is not the demon that everyone thinks he is, because, he induces Indra to fight. He's, even when Indra seems like a little bit timid or whatever, he tries, he's like, come on, Indra, you can do this, He actually encourages him to fight. And then he starts preaching and talking about devotional service and love of Godhead and everything that, well, I don't want to, spoil the suspense, but it turns out that he's not the demon that his father was expecting, that Vishwarup's father was expecting to come out of the fire. Yes.
So just to confirm then, I think you've helped me understand, but I was wondering why the demigods are so concerned if this demon isn't all that powerful, but at this point they're not understanding that the demon...
Well, they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know. They see this big demon come out, and now they're kind of, so now they're praying to the Lord for some protection, because they don't know that the mantra has been chanted wrong. They don't know that Indra can be more powerful than Vitrasura, or that Vitrasura is a devotee and is going to give encouragement and instruct the demigods. So that's why they're praying to the Lord for shelter. And that's our position. Often we pray to the Lord for some type of material benediction that we don't even need. We don't understand that we're protected by the Lord, especially through the agency of the spiritual master. Every morning when we recite the prayer, we ask, please give us the shade of your lotus feet. Your fame is spread throughout the three worlds. We take shelter at your lotus feet. So when one has a desire to approach or develop love of Godhead, Krishna will send a spiritual master, a purified, pure devotee who can impart instruction, who can guide us, who can show us the way, who can give us shelter, give us the shade of his lotus feet. And we take the spiritual master as a representative of Krishna, equal to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because he's giving us the Lord's shelter. He's bestowing upon us what Krishna has for us. He gives us that by way of knowledge and instruction. And as we see, I don't know how many of you were here in the 60s, but there was all kinds of gurus going around, these false, bogus gurus, and they were charging money for some mantra or, giving some Shakti or whatever. They weren't giving pure love of Godhead. And when Srila Prabhupada came to the Western world, he just freely bestowed love of Godhead by distributing freely the Maha Mantra, profuse prasadam distribution, accepting anyone who would be willing to take shelter, no qualifications, no charge. And he even said, this is free, just come and take it. I was reading the other night that Srila Prabhupada was saying that people who are sinful and they don't give up their sinful activities, they're considered wet fuel, and it's a little bit more difficult for them to catch the fire of devotional service, where those who have given up sinful activities are like dry fuel. When they start chanting the mantra and rendering devotional service, immediately the fire of devotional service kindles. And so that's why we follow the four regulative principles, because that helps us to become sinless. So, we need to put ourselves in a position where we're able to accept the shelter that's being freely given by accepting the spiritual master's instruction, or representatives of the spiritual master also give instruction. When Srila Prabhupada was on the planet, he was traveling all over, taking care of managerial affairs, establishing temples, and the movement was just expanding in leaps and bounds. And of course, he couldn't be in every temple giving individual instruction, but he had managers in the temple who he deemed qualified, who would serve as his representative. And that's what he said. He said that you should just follow the temple management. They were representatives of himself, and he had empowered them to take on managerial affairs, to see to the welfare of the devotees, to see to the preaching activities. And the devotees were expected to just follow the guidance of the management. Of course, the management would never or should never ask the devotees to do anything that's unsafe, illegal, or anything like that. So as long as the management was acting under the orders of Srila Prabhupada and giving good instruction, then the devotees had every faith in the management of the temples. and things went very nicely. When I was first initiated, my spiritual master just said to me, just do what your temple president tells you. Whatever he says, you just take that as instruction coming from me, and that way I'll be pleased. And that's how Srila Prabhupada viewed it. He wanted everyone to cooperate together. And he even said that in his last days, is that your love for me will be shown by how well you will cooperate together. So we should always be mindful that, devotees that are in a management position have a very, very heavy burden, because they're actually having to see to the welfare of all the devotees in the community. And as you were saying, Pip, even the most insignificant individual needs to be cared for. Otherwise, why are we here? So, we should give all respect to the managers, temple leaders, follow their instruction, and have confidence that the instruction that they're giving and the way that they're leading us is sound. Of course, we don't believe in blind following. So if something doesn't seem to be right in the management, and I'm not just speaking of this temple here, I'm just saying in general, not speaking on any specific situation or any specific location, just in general, if something doesn't seem right with temple management, then, we would seek the shelter of advanced devotees who are not, who are outside the community, just to get advice or just to pacify our minds that what's going on in our community is sound and bona fide. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you, Prabhu. I just want to ask you about this in the translation here, where it says, we have sought shelter of your lotus feet for instruction. That's the first line, and then please give us relief by counteracting our present distress. So it's very conditional. I'm just sort of reflecting that perhaps a lot of the time when I'm seeking instruction myself, I have this same mentality. I maybe don't express it, but there's some sort of conditions that I want people to. So if you could explain how to become, properly surrounded and just ask for instruction without expectation of what it will be.
When we ask for instruction, we should ask for instruction on spiritual matters. If it's something that will help us to advance spiritually, if we're looking for relief from distress, if it's materially motivated or some material instruction that we're looking for, that's conditional. But if it's instruction that we're looking for that will relieve us from distress of maybe feeling like we're not advancing in devotional service, or we may not be practicing properly, how can we improve? That kind of instruction is welcome, even though it may be self-motivated, it's spiritually motivated. So a big problem sometimes with the spiritual masters have is that the disciple will approach the spiritual master for some type of material advice. I'm thinking about taking this job, but I'm not really sure. My financial situation is such and such. What should I do? I want to engage in this activity. Please give me your blessings. Those types of things. They're not coming and asking for spiritual instruction. They're expecting that the spiritual master will guide them both materially and spiritually. So the spiritual master welcomes questions and will give instruction, sound instruction on spiritual matters. But the spiritual master is not there as, do they have Dear Abby in this country? Dear Abby, it's a column in the newspaper where people write in with their problems. What is it? Oh, well, whatever. Anyway, so that's not the spiritual master's position, that, I just write you with my problem, and then now you're supposed to give me an answer. It doesn't work like that. So when we ask for instruction from senior devotees or temple leaders or spiritual leaders. If it's spiritually motivated, if it's helping us to advance in our spiritual life, even if it's some material condition, these how can I questions that we get all the time. How can I do such and such? How can I do such and such? If it's not materially motivated, even though it is self-motivated, it's actually selfless, because we want to be able to render devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and to our spiritual master to the best of our ability. And if there's something that's inhibiting that or is an obstruction, then we would approach someone for instruction, even though it may seem like it's motivated. Does that answer your question? Was that the question you were asking?
Yeah, thank you very much. I have just a follow-up. Just if you could maybe talk a little bit about the art of asking good questions. You see that Bhagavatam exists because of good questions by Maharaj Parikshit, and I feel quite often if you just approach like a senior devotee with like a vague, like they will give you a vague answer, but how to actually get the nectar.
So you just answered your own question. You should think about what your situation is, what you're going to ask, why you're going to ask it. Often devotees will approach a senior devotee for instruction, but they wouldn't have really formulated in their mind what their situation is and how they're going to ask it. And so you're not going to get a succinct answer if you don't have a very specific question. And you should be prepared that if the person who's giving instruction asks you for questions for further clarification so they can understand your situation, that you're able to answer those questions so that the devotee who you're coming to for advice can understand what your actual situation is. And that means a little bit of self-reflection before you approach for instruction. Why am I asking this instruction? What am I actually trying to accomplish by asking? What's my actual situation? Maybe even try to figure it out on yourself. Why am I feeling this way? So when you go to ask for instruction, you should be prepared that you understand what your actual situation is. If you don't understand your actual situation, then by coming to the devotee, someone for instruction, you can actually say, I don't understand what my situation is. I'm feeling this way. I don't know why I'm feeling this way. When someone has been in devotional service for a number of years, we think, have seen it all. So pretty much they can give advice. Like Mahatma Prabhu was saying that, sometimes devotees will come to him for advice, and before they even finish saying what they're saying, he's already knows what the situation is, and he can finish their sentences basically. And they say, well, how do you know? And he's like, well, it's not uncommon. So, there's only a limited amount of problems or shortcomings that devotees can have. It's not like everything in the world. If we're following the four regulative principles, if we're trying to chant nicely, then our problems are very, very limited. Especially if you're living in the temple, your needs are provided for, material needs. No one here is going hungry. No one here is going unclothed. No one here has any lack of association. So if you're living in the temple, basically all your material needs are covered. I had a friend when I was a younger devotee. His mother sent him $5 for him to get what he needed. And like a year later, he still had the $5 because he really didn't have anything to spend it on. So, if we're satisfied with that, then whatever our problems are limited, So, yeah, I don't remember why I'm saying that. But, we approach devotees for instruction, and, there's only a limited amount of problems that we can have. Yeah. Any other questions? amongst the mothers, women? No questions. No questions. Okay, then we can end here. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Gaur Premanandi.
Haribol. His Grace Pradyumna Prabhu ki jai.
All of you ki jai.